Well, here we go again. It's always such a pleasure. Back in the world of Dark Souls 3, last time we basically did the intro, got to the Firelink Shrine, and now we get to one of the more exciting parts of the run for me, because we get to introduce a lot of the world building concepts that get used throughout the game, but especially in the later titles. So there's a couple things that I want to bring up before we even step into our first area, the High Wall of Lothric. Okay, so the first thing is that one of the major themes in Dark Souls 3, it's probably present within other games, but it's most prominent in Dark Souls 3, is a question of succession. All of these thrones are held by someone who had some kind of drama around a succession of the monarchy, effectively. And you can interpret a lot of the events that happen in the game within that lens. Along those lines, one of the things to keep in mind is that all of the enemies that we see are not necessarily allied. A lot of times, what we'll have is environmental storytelling, where one area will have one group of enemies and one area will have another group of areas, and there's an implied tension between the two. It's most obvious here and in some other areas where there's open fighting, but it's, I think, true in an extensive amount of the world design, and specifically Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. It's actually, I suspect, hinted at in one of the first covenants that we will see after we get out of this area. The final thing is that areas in Dark Souls are not chronologically concurrent. Everything that's happening in them is not happening in the same time. I have a belief, based off of specifically, it first kicked in with the Chalice Dungeons of Bloodborne, that a lot of this game design is built around the idea of seeing a civilization progressively deteriorate, and each area has a sort of chronological progression, maybe even sometimes a branching of two choices. All of these are going to be, I think, important elements in this next area, so let's go ahead and go in. The first thing we have is this room, and it's not used for anything else in the game, but it's very distinct. You have what appear to be gargoyles at the top, something that will show up later. They have crowns and such. I don't really have a sense of why this room is here, which puzzles me infinitely. What's, I think, most striking about it is this dead former flame, presumably. It looks like a coiled sword that was being kept here. The other thing is that we have a drain. Again, the water themes of the idea of you coming up the drain, in my interpretation. If that was intended, we can't say for sure, but that's what I'm running with. We have this typical door opening graphic, very noticeable within all of the games. And we'll just go ahead to go to our first bonfire. Bonfire is positioned in such a way that we notice one of the first themes of this area. People, hollows turning to trees. That is one of the themes of this area. And how it actually interacts is something I'm not 100% sure yet. But it's something to keep in mind, something to point out. We have a bit of a sniper. Best to take him down ahead of time. The raw gem. Oh, I didn't think it was going to show up this early. Alright, so in Dark Souls, you have gems that boost the flat damage of the weapon but remove its scaling. For instance, on our weapon, we have D-scaling and D in both strength and dexterity, which means we add a point of strength, we get a little bit of damage. As the weapon upgrades, that scaling gets more and more prominent. The raw weapon boosts that base physical, the 110, but removes scaling. So when you're low skill early on in the game, it can be a sizable upgrade to have something like that, but later on they fall behind. I think that there's also a storytelling element in these weapons. The idea that if you are a inferior force raiding a castle against knights, having just raw damage, having like simple effective weapons that you can put on a lot of different people can turn the battle. I would like that dog to proc. There we go. Oh, that was interesting. All right. This area is very similar to the area in Dark Souls 1 that we recently visited, the Undead Burg. There's a lot of thematic callbacks worth keeping in mind. We also have our usual statue friends. Some of them have been decapitated. That's pretty typical. All right, so this next part's going to go pretty quick. I don't really want to fight here, but we're going to grab an item. A broken area. We'll see a second one like this, so it's not a big deal. And there we go. We have our friend, the Pus of Man, similar to the first boss, although this time in a hollow rather than a big hulking boss like Udex Grunder. That pronunciation. We have our raw friend here. He's not very good at what he does, but he tries. They do a really good job of making these enemies threatening enough to be intimidating, but also, incompetent in some ways, especially early on. There's a good bit of design that they talk about in Dark Souls 2, where they always want the fights to feel real, and therefore giving an enemy a weakness is a way to make them feel like actual beings rather than a bunch of polygons that you're beating up. And they make a lot of efforts throughout the series to give enemies interesting weaknesses. They are something we'll talk about later on when we get to future bosses. All right, so that was one path. Our second path shows us one of the other themes of this area. We've got our usual, like, hollow friends not super happy about things. His Scream tends to activate one of these hollows, and also calls the guard up. So the second theme is that there's a war of some sort involving dragons. We see these corpses of dragons. It's not entirely clear why they are here, but it's definitely something that is important. Something, again, to keep in mind. We can get up on close with our dragon friend here at Crack. I don't think you can actually make it up there, but who knows, maybe someone has pulled it off and has left an interesting message. One of the things about this area that always strikes me is all of the chairs here. It's peculiar, and I don't have a good answer for it. We have also the reclamation of nature by branches. I believe in Dark Souls 1 they mentioned that a lot of that was inspired by Angkor Wat. And we have, again, our typical binoculars. Nice little item for trying to scope out the world design of the area. With that said, let's actually look around for a little bit, because these areas are pretty well made and also foreshadow a lot of things. One of the first places we will be going to is over there, that cathedral. And here we see a motif that gets repeated throughout a lot of everything past Dark Souls 2, I think, probably excluding Sekiro for obvious reasons. The rose window. There is a desire in these games to often make like the central religious area of the storyline often have a rose window. In fact, within Bloodborne, we have two very noteworthy ones. So, one potential hint to how the dragon was taken down is down here. We have the gold pine resin. These are items that buff your weapon to have lightning temporarily, and dragons are weak against lightning. So, could be the case that the lesser enemies, these like sort of incompetent raw raiders, use the resin to take down the dragons in mass. That's a theory. I'm not going to speak much on one way or the other. It's kind of intriguing that it's speculated to be a fungal resin. Fungus doesn't get mentioned a ton directly in this game, but it's super prominent in Dark Souls 1. And there's a hint of it in this later on in one of these areas. Gee, oof. All right. Yeah, celebratory binoculars. Interesting sort of thing. We'll come back to this. Fire bombs are another weapon that would be used by sort of troops that aren't very effective at what they do, but are trying to take something en masse. So this is one of the most curious places that I've never heard actually brought up. It's obviously a jail cell. This is designed to be a jail cell, and it's also pretty clear that this would be the jailer keeping watch of the cell. But as a jail cell, it's kind of ineffective if you have a ladder that goes up and just goes outside. So one of my theories is that what we're seeing here among these raw invaders was a jailbreak, because if you think about it, this kind of recreates the beginning of Dark Souls 1, where if someone was stuck in that cell, they would be throwing something down to them, in this case, a ladder. It's also interesting that this grate that I mentioned kind of replicates the grate that you find Anastasia behind in Dark Souls 1. There's always these structural motifs that get repeated throughout the series, and I do believe that they mean something, even though I can't always tell you what it is they mean. This next stretch is pretty fun. You have a choice. You can go up or you can go down. Going down is rough. Going up is also rough for different reasons. We're going to go up. I don't care about these items. I don't even remember what they are. There is one that's interesting back there. This dragon breathing section, it might seem familiar if you remember any part of the last Dark Souls 1 run. It is a motif that gets repeated, again tying this to the Undead Burg and Undead Parish. So we have here our friend, well, Ilse. Always intriguing how they attack with kicks. That move tracks really well. It will throw you if you don't respect it. Literally. A reasonably dangerous enemy, but very telegraphed. All the moves are telegraphed. So we get a Deep Battle Axe. Deep is another one of those buffs like Raw that removes scaling. You see that we have no scaling on this weapon for a considerable boost to the base damage. So the question would be, why is this here? And I think there's an answer to that. I think that the pus of men that we see are part of an invading force, and they have obviously adopted the Deep as the way to take on this castle. Are they concurrent with the dragon fight? I'm not entirely sure. We have a knight. If you have trouble with the knight, what you have to do is just, wait him out. He will path down, and you do not have to fight him. Makes this next stretch, you know, significantly easier. And when you've reached here, you've hit a pretty important spot. We have our first bonfire of the area, besides the starter. Good place to get your health back, get your health refilled, go spend souls if you want to. We also get a very close-up view of that dragon spitting on us. Is it a different dragon than the first one, or is it chronologically prior to that area? Not really honestly sure of that. Of course, we're talking about authorial intent here. It could be whatever you like, I suppose. We have one of our usual themes, a place that looks like you're supposed to go up and cannot. Those frustrated me so much when I started this series, and you kind of get used to them. I think they're here to tell a story, part of the purpose. I do not know how close I am to the 30 minutes, so we'll explore a little more. Now, these enemies are interesting because they are, you know, next to a knight who is a highly trained soldier, but they are not particularly a military grade. They seem more like robbers, thieves, assassins, perhaps. It could be that the assassins broke in through here and are trying to infiltrate the area. I kind of lean to that interpretation. We have one of our favorite bits of Dark Souls, the enemies climbing up ramparts. Could have sworn there's a second one, but maybe he'll show up. More soul items, nothing too exciting with them. If they mean anything, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, yes. There we go. Alright, so this next bit. We have another plus of man up there we're going to do. And hopefully this makes it, you know, a lot easier to not have to deal with that. We have our crystal lizards. Series favorite. A rod gem, again, sort of implying the idea that whoever's in this historical moment attacking is not highly trained. They are more of an improvisational force, more of a barbarian trying to get into the walls with maybe not the usual sort of ethical distinction, or not disparaging barbarians here. So we skipped the first night. This one is less skippable, but we can do this in the meanwhile. This dude's pretty amusing. Hiding, sleeping, hard to say for sure. Undead Hunter Charm is an item that probably has a meaning. I do not have a theory for it, so I'm going to... And so we have one of these assassins again, and the lone one of this particular area. And what we have up there is a way that assassins could break into this area. Again, we have environmental storytelling about infiltration of a society, of a knightly society being beset by less technologically savvy invaders. This is an annoying... I never have a good time the first time I face one of these in a new game. That was just panic rolling, not the greatest thing to do. Or the double roll, that's buffering. Much cleaner. Sad and pathetic up until that point. Lothric Nighthelm. Is there anything interesting about that? Let's have a check. The 3 pillars are a thing that's brought up, and it says that the 3 pillars, and presumably these red knights, are loyal to the wyverns. So the invading force that is against these knights are also going to be probably the ones responsible for the dead wyverns that we see around here. The items show to us sort of an allegiance of some of the forces to others. That's a place. We're not going to go there yet. Broadsword's pretty good. If I recall correctly, most people think the longsword's slightly better, but it is a very straightforward and easy to use weapon if you are not enjoying your class starter weapon. Good thing to pick up. Something, if you have the fire gem from the start, you can use to a cheap fire weapon to have around for things that proves somewhat useful later on. We have again assassins and more standard barbarians. And this is actually honestly a really good shield. I'm gonna go ahead and equip that. Like that physical absorption, it tends to be the most essential part. There is nothing especially interesting about the rest of it. There's also weapon skills, which I obviously just ignore because I'm something. I'm a traditionalist. Oh boy. I should have taken that a little more seriously. Dogs make other enemies significantly more difficult, which is pretty thematic. In of themselves, they're not a huge threat, but they amplify the threat of things around them. I would have liked to, but he's not going to path close enough. It's like, that weapon is probably a little too heavy for him. He does not swing it especially cleanly. I just love the little details like that. We have one more enemy in the back, plus there's a surprise, but Titanite shards are always nice to have, and it gives us our first weapon upgrade. Would have been better to get a backstab there, but we're fine. We have an anvil. It's interesting that perhaps this is an area that was being used to forge the troops, and perhaps the area that the barbarians and or assassins are trying to break into. And on the top, well, you know, I'm saying it's an anvil, but who really knows for sure? On the top we have an Estus shard. I mean, it looks very anvilish, but things can be misleading in these games. Upper, who is staring at an item rather than like helping fight. We're out. This is jail silk. Okay, that's going to be what we came here for, along with the Estus shard. Once you have those two items, you are more or less set for the important things if you're trying to get, you know, the biggest upgrades to your life bar and also sort of future storyline elements. The last thing we have to do here is go past this. This is probably skippable for a lot of classes, but we'll go ahead and do it. Try to be a little bit completionist. Green Blossom, we got a bookshelf. There's an interesting bit about the Green Blossoms, if I recall correctly. Ties it to the Undead Legion of Farron, which is one of the things that tie this area to a future boss that we'll see. There's a couple of those nearby. We have the Astora Straight Sword, a returning weapon from Dark Souls 1, if I recall correctly. Nothing I have to say specifically about that. It's a weapon that has some uses, but generally falls off in value. I've never really had a build that had a reason to use it myself. So anyway, next part's going to be a little boring. We have to go use a gel sulky somewhere else that we've passed, so I think I will cut it at here, and then we will resume after we get back to the area that has the next block bit, because all this is just recapping. So thank you, and I will see you shortly if you're watching these videos concurrently, successively.